What's up, everyone? Dr. Michael Falk with the Kinetic Sports Medicine and Performance Podcast. I'm here to talk to you today about the do's and don'ts of the early stage ACL rehab process. This is something that I've changed my mind about quite a bit in these last several years compared to what we used to talk about when we first opened our clinic in Milwaukee, Wisconsin about 7 years ago. So I used to really think that the early stage of your ACL rehab was important but not critical, and that it could really be done anywhere, and that it was really the late stage that was the most important aspect of that ACL rehab process. I have not changed my mind about how important that late stage ACL rehab is. It is critical to be with someone that knows what they are doing when it comes time to get back to high performance, return to sport decisions, getting back into practice, testing, and improving all of those things. That is still key and crucial, but we have really changed our mind on our recommendations for that early stage of the ACL rehab, because we get a lot of athletes that start with us halfway through that ACL rehab process and they worked elsewhere early. And we see it if we didn't hit some of the key mile markers and milestones in that early phase of your ACL rehab, it really sets you back and can have long-lasting effects that are going to delay your return to the field or court and affect your long-term outcomes. So this early stage is crucial, and I'm going to walk through some of the reasons why it is so important and things that you need to stay on top of so that you get the most out of this early stage of your ACL, and it sets the foundation to make progress and get back on the field or court in that time frame that we're all looking for, right around that 9-month mark. Okay, the first one is getting your range of motion back. Now, this is not challenging, honestly. For you as an athlete or someone that's recovering from ACL, you play a key role in this. Okay, going to the PT once, twice, 3 times a week and working on range of motion isn't enough, quite frankly. It's going to be how much do you do at home every day in between those visits to really dictate, can you get back to getting that full range of motion as quickly as possible, especially knee straightening. Okay, from day one post-surgery, you need to be on top of that knee straightening right off the bat, and we want to get that knee totally straight as quickly as we can. That is going to help us restore normal walking patterns and get that quad firing as quick as possible, in addition to just making sure that we don't end up developing something that's called a cyclops lesion, which is a collection of scar tissue that can really slow you down when it comes time to start running and those things later on. But that knee range of motion is going to come almost, I don't want to say easily, because it is challenging, but that shouldn't be that difficult to get. Okay. The second key thing is getting swelling decreased. And again, you as an athlete or someone that's recovering from ACL rehab will play a key role in this. One is just not overdoing it, listening to your PT, listening to your surgeon, following their guidelines, not trying to do too much too soon. The second part is going to be making sure that we're keeping compression on that knee, getting it elevated. That is going to really help get that swelling down. And then third, just doing your rehab, getting it bending and getting that quad firing is going to help with the swelling reduction. Now, what else can you do outside of that? Early phases, definitely icing and those things will help, but really compression is one of the biggest things. So getting some type of a knee sleeve, leg compression garment on, anything like that will help that swelling continue to trend down over time. Those two things are critical, and I'm not undervaluing them, but quite frankly, they can be done almost anywhere. And every physical therapist should have the skill set to help you with those. Where we start seeing issues is once we start talking about strength. And in particular, I'm going to talk about quad strength, but hamstring strength and hip strength does matter as well. And we cannot forget the other leg as well. When we start talking about strength, this is key. And people sometimes are surprised that we're talking about the early phase of your ACL rehab, and I am already talking about strength. And I am absolutely going to hit on this from day one in some way, shape, or form, right? Are we going to crawl under a bar and do a max effort squat on day one, or do a max effort really anything? Absolutely not. It is going to start in those very first couple of days after surgery with just getting your quad firing and getting your quad tone back and making sure we get that going. But early on, we need to start doing relatively hard exercises to get your quad strength back. One of the things that we have been seeing a lot with these athletes that come in later on and try to work with us for their end stage rehab process is their quad is significantly underpowered. they do not have the required strength to do some of the tasks that we want to do as we go forward. So it is like the quad is not the only thing, but it is a major thing. In particular, with these new grafts that are being done, the quad tendon graft, which is increasing in popularity, especially in our area in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we're seeing more and more of these, there are specific ranges of motion that your quad strength is really lost because of that graft, and we need to hit in the rehab process to make sure we recover it as quickly and as safely as possible. Okay, so this, I cannot overemphasize how important this aspect is. Okay, so what types of things can you be doing to get that strength back? Early on, it's going to be using electrical stimulation to help you get that good quad tone firing early. In that early phases, it's working on getting your quad firing every day, multiple times per day. And then we are going to start loading that quad. And we need to choose exercises that you cannot fake your way around, right? Your brain is very smart. It is not going to want to do things that stress that graft site, that stress that knee. It is going to find ways to shift loads into your hips, into your low back, into your glutes, anything other than loading through that quad where they took the graft. We need to be smart with the exercises that we choose so that we don't overdo it and cause some type of a setback, increase the swelling by really irritating your knee. But we must start loading that quad, that patellar tendon, the patellofemoral joint, and the knee early in this rehab process. We cannot forget about the other leg as well. This is another trend that we see. If we work with an athlete from pre-surgery even, the earliest possible time we will get data on their uninvolved leg. When we do our first strength test at about 3 months post-op, that other leg will be weaker, and we actually still work on the other leg. When we see some of these athletes that come in later, relative to their peers, we see their overall strength levels on both legs be significantly lower at that mid to late stage of their ACL rehab because that other leg hasn't been doing the things that it's used to doing, right? So just because you have one leg that's injured does not mean you have to stop training that other side. There are multiple benefits from maintaining movement patterns to maintaining your strength, power, explosiveness. And then you'll even get 10% of a carryover from strength training on that uninvolved leg will carry over into your surgical leg, even if you don't do anything. So training hard on that uninvolved leg will help your surgical side recover faster and hit those strength measurements sooner. There are so many different ways to go about training that surgical side and the uninvolved leg safely, using blood flow restriction, using E-stim, using different variations of isometric pushes. And some of it is your physical therapist, but a lot of it falls on the athlete to execute that plan with the correct intention as well. So it takes a true partnership between the PT and the athlete to really get the most out of this early phase where they're communicating, they're pushing, they're not overdoing it, causing setbacks, right? But we are moving the needle forward, and that athlete should feel like they are working very hard. The next thing that is key is the movement patterns, and this is going to go hand in hand with the strength. One of the things that we have noticed is we see people try to get into complex exercises too quickly. Learning movement patterns, the analogy that I've heard is it's like adding a book onto a bookshelf. And once that book gets put up there, it can never be taken off. So I'm going to use this example of a squat because this is a common one that we will see where very early athletes will start squatting. And truthfully, there are so many ways to squat without really loading your knee. It is very easy to compensate, to shift to that uninvolved side, to shift more pressure into your hips, to fold more forward at your trunk, and really avoid putting any type of heavy load or really any load at all through the front of that knee. And we will see athletes that start doing this early in their rehab process, which is great, and they feel like they're ahead of schedule. And that's awesome. We're never going to discourage somebody from trying to make progress and do something that feels good and gets them stronger. But when we ask you to do something that you don't have the ability to control through your quad and through that graft site yet, and you start learning how to do it wrong, that is a movement pattern that is very, very hard to break. And that movement pattern starts carrying over into lunges and then single leg squats. And then as we start getting into agility movements, it starts going into your landing mechanics, your cutting mechanics. And that pattern that isn't that big a deal on a squat starts to turn into a huge deal on those other things because it will decrease your performance, but it actually has some high risk areas of re-injury based off how that knee functions and bends and where the force goes. And those things can be learned in this early phase. From what we've seen, and this is just our experience, it is much harder to break that bad learned habit that you've been doing the last 2, 3, 4 months than it is to start working on a new one when we're putting you in the right exercises for what your knee is able to handle and so that you can do them correctly. And we try to give you objective feedback so that you know, are you doing that movement right or wrong? And we're building good habits from day one in that rehab process. So sometimes trying to move faster and get into those more complicated tasks earlier is not necessarily better. Even though you feel like you're ahead, it actually starts slowing you down later on. The last thing, this is kind of newer research. There's a lot that's coming out about the ACL and how it is actually a sensory organ, where through the ACL, there are actually nerves that play a key component in the proprioception of your knee. And what does proprioception mean? That is effectively those nerves in that joint telling your brain where your body is in space. And so what we've learned is this ACL has a key component of as a sensory organ in giving your brain feedback on what is going on at that knee. That is something that maybe doesn't come back quite as well in a graft as maybe what we would have thought, and might play a role in some of these re-injuries and some of the movement patterns that emerge and athletes struggle with when we're back on the field. What we've learned is that we can actually work on this and not necessarily get the sensory aspect of the ACL, but teach the body how to compensate it by incorporating neurocognitive tasks early in your ACL rehab. That is another fancy word. Effectively, we will use things like strobe glasses where we affect your vision, and we will use things like mental games and cognitive distractions while we're doing these exercises to force your brain to focus on other things and get feedback from your knees and your joints on, is it doing the exercise correctly and what is your body doing in space? This then has huge implications when it comes time to play a game, because what we don't want to see is we don't want an athlete that goes back out on the basketball court and is trying to remember the play and is trying to remember the dribbling move that they're going to do to get past their defender, right? And trying to read the defense and make the right decisions. And they are instead not able to process all that because they're really having to internally focus on what's going on at their knee, right? Or we don't want their knee movement patterns to get worse, to become more high risk because they're so distracted by all of the things that go on when you're actually playing a sport. So from day one of your rehab process, we really think it's important to incorporate some of these newer techniques that the research is starting to give strong information that it is very impactful for long-term outcomes and injury risk. And it needs to be started in the early phase of your rehab program. And this is why it can be key to get to be with a PT that's not just kind of your standard physical therapist that sees everyone, and into someone that's truly an ACL rehab expert. So these are just some of the reasons that we think this early phase is so important, and our opinion of it has really changed from our experience over the last 7 years, to the point that when we start talking to families now, it almost takes us the same number of visits when we work with an athlete to get them back to sport, whether we start from day one pre-op or whether we start them at 12 weeks, 14, 16 weeks post-op, because some of the time when we're trying to catch up, it actually takes a lot longer to break some of the bad habits and to get some of the strength deficits that have now been lingering over this longer period of time back, that it really delays the return to sport because of some of the mistakes or just delays that occurred in the early stages of that rehab process. So I hope this is helpful as we go through what we see with this early phase. Hopefully it goes and can give you some things to open a line of communication with your medical team. If you are in the Milwaukee area and you are going through an ACL rehab program, I would love to chat and try to answer any of your questions. You can schedule a link to talk with me, and we will go through the specifics of your case and see if we can give you some insights so that you make sure you're getting the best care on your way back onto the field or court so that you can accomplish your goals. Appreciate everyone for listening. We'll see you guys on the next episode.